for me to say I am not great at arriving at a diagnosis. I am not great at one of these doing surgery. I am not great. I am not great. I am not great. The only thing I hear, I can learn how to make a better diagnosis.
Right.
I can learn how to get a better clinical history. I can learn how to do better surgery. I can learn how to slow down. I can learn how to acknowledge the capabilities of the staff. I can learn how to do these things.
Welcome to the PAWCast.
All right, guys, thanks for joining us again. Another PAWCast here. We're into our kind of third recording session, which should be coming out here pretty soon for y'all. Today, we're actually going to talk about another one of the major problems on our industry overview. We kind of identified culture, service, and talent as being three big issues within the veterinary profession. And of course, last week we talked about culture. So this week, kind of talking about talent. I think when we talk about talent, it's really important for us to not talk about preclinical students, clinical students, pre-graduates, postgraduates. I think what happens with the discussion of talent on quote unquote today's generation is there is unfortunately a lot of negative stigma that has come with the millennials, more so just because elders are sort of passing judgment.
Yeah. I always believe generations are a means for other generations to complain about the youth.
Always. I mean, like I said, I'm like the world's best people watcher. I've been watching the movement of people since I was 5.
Yeah.
One of my earliest memories is just listening to conversations of like my grandparents. And I mean, my great grandparents was an Italian. I never knew what the hell they were talking about, but I mean, it's like, coming down into, saying it's like, for the last 30 years, all I've heard about is old people complaining about young people,
right.
And then middle-aged people complaining about younger people.
Yeah.
And it was always like, I was just kind of standing on the outside. I'm like, why is everybody complaining? I'm like, you were the ones they were complaining about 20 years ago. Just Everyone needs to calm down. But, I think when we talk about talent, we need to be cautious that we really aren't passing judgment on whole groups of people. It's more so of in this sort of talent category. When we look at sort of our industry overviews, what we're talking about talent is it's not they're less intelligent, because that's not the case.
No.
I think that's another thing that comes with these sort of generational gaps where it's like, kids today are lazy and dumb. It's like, let's put it in a perspective here. No one actually knows how the pyramids were built. I mean, there are a lot of theories on how they were built. I mean, the rolling platforms stuff. I mean, I think we've gotten very close to figuring it out. There were people a hell of a lot smarter than us back then figuring that shit out with stone tools. And today we still haven't figured it out. So let's just be a little humble about who we're calling, dumb and lazy. And actually Joe Rogan had a pretty funny bit in his stand-up on Joe Rogan Live about that, about the stone cutters. It's one of my more favorite stand-ups.
We'll link it in the description.
We'll link it in. Yeah, that's fine. I think, anyway, back on topic here. So when we talk about talent, as far as the industry overview is concerned, I think that the big thing when you look at all the issues that we're having with talent currently, and you kind of cone it down to one individual piece, we have talked about a little bit in our past cast, is that it's a loss of self-worth.
Yeah.
And, I think we've said it a few different ways. I mean, I turned it as loss of self-worth, but really it's the loss of individuality. It's the loss of autonomy. It's just you are going to plug into this system, and this system exists, and this system has always existed. And this traditional system this is who you are now. And the other alternative from tradition is corporate. And in that environment, you have even less individuality.
Right.
But I think, if you can, I'm sure we can display our industry overview here on the video, just so everyone can kind of follow along, and this can be available for download as well. But this diagram is incredibly strategically placed, and that's just kind of how mind works. My mind works as a mind map. Is that if you look at that talent category and the three kind of sub problems within talent with this loss of self-worth, is we're talking hierarchy, deteriorating skill set, and then this debt to income ratio. Well, hierarchy is right next to the culture hexagon. And the reason why I kind of placed it in that category is all of the stuff that we talked about kind of in our culture section is that when you start to see this hierarchical system being taught at the university level to then carry over into private practice, that's where we start to have this huge issue with loss of self-worth. Is it's like, well, I'm just a veterinary student, I don't know anything. And it's like, because that's what you're taught, that's what your instructors, this culturally, they're sort of bringing to you, and that's part of that disparagement. That's why in the culture circle or the culture hexagon, you can see that disparagement is the closest to the loss of self-worth, and that's why those two things are aligned with one another. And so when we start to talk about this hierarchy, it's like we identified before, is that the hierarchy in place where it's this top-down distribution of information is you always have to look up for the answer. And saying these are the people I have to go to for this, these are the people I have to go to for this. And I think to a certain degree that works in some professions, some industries, but when you're talking about an environment where we are now taught that once we get out of school, not only is there a hierarchy, but now somehow we went from being the bottom of the totem pole to then the top of the totem pole. Day one of graduation.
Flick of a switch.
Flick of a switch. It's like you're in school and it's like, I am garbage. You come out and it's like, you're the vet now.
You have to have all of the answers.
I wasn't ready for that.
You have to be able to train at all levels of the clinic that you're going to go work in.
Absolutely.
And you have to know everything medically.
Yeah, well, exactly, and that was actually my perspective when I first got out of veterinary school. I have to credit a lot of my classmates when I went through school, Laura and Catherine, and there was a couple of these other students that were in my class, and they may not remember saying this, but it stuck with me from kind of that first year of vet school. They basically said, you're arrogant. That we love you, you're very personable, but you're kind of an arrogant asshole. And basically saying when you get out in a private practice, we are not going to allow you to go through this school system and mistreat your technicians. They're like, you have it in you to really be an ass.
Right.
And, I remember, and like I said, I'm kind of paraphrasing, but I just remember that was always one of those big discussions, that it would come up intermittently, and they may not remember it, but it has stuck vividly. But the idea was when I got out of school, it was exactly that. Is I had always maintained this sort of humble thing where it's like, okay, if I have this propensity in me to mistreat people simply through either my knowledge or just the way in which I carry myself, I need to be cognizant of that.
Yeah.
But when I first got out of school, I still had that ingrained culture where this hierarchical system is then saying, well, I'm going from bottom of the totem pole to then top of the totem pole, and you're not prepared to be top of the totem pole. But then when you sort of get into a private practice setting, it's still sort of the same top-down stuff. Is you may have lost, as a veterinarian, you may have lost self-worth when you were in veterinary school, but then you come out and it's like, oh, well, I am the veterinarian now because that's what I need to be and that's what the job is going to dictate. And then it's like, well, now I'm sort of top of the totem pole, but I don't really have a lot of the skills to be at the top of the totem pole, but I am because that's what the culture says. And it's like, oh, and then when you're above your technicians and you're above your medical support and you're above your caregiver support, and by God, you're definitely above your caregivers, your clients, right? Because I know all of the information. Well, I know more information than they do. So when we talk about this loss of self-worth, when we talk about talent, it's very dynamic. So it's, yes, on one hand, veterinarians themselves are taught that they have very little worth when they're in school, but we perpetuate that when we come out into veterinary school, where it's like, oh, well, now we have a new technician who's coming into our organization, or we have an unlicensed assistant coming into our organization, and it's the same thing. You will be in your place. This is the role that you have here. And we touched on it a little bit, but I think the big thing is that when you have innately creative individuals or highly intelligent individuals, that's among the worst things that can happen to you as someone in a very creative role or in a very official role that goes, from a medical standpoint, is sort of this loss of self-worth. But the hierarchical system is the cornerstone. That's why it's kind of at the top of the three items within that particular hexagon, is because as soon as we learn that there's a hierarchy, as soon as we embrace that there is a hierarchy, it's just a complete deterioration of sort of everyone's individuality and everyone's sort of self-worth.
Yeah, and thinking about that even just more on a broad cultural perspective, one of the things that I've heard since I was a kid, and everyone's probably heard along the way multiple times, is if you find a job you love, you never work a day in your life,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Well, the reason that everyone says that is because they're probably ending up in one of these positions, regardless of industry,
Right.
where you're not really yourself entirely,
Right.
and you're just you're a part of this machine that did work, whatever industry it might be. At some point in time, they all functioned,
Yep.
but they've all, a lot of them have gotten outdated, and then they end up going from like, yep, I have a purpose, to now I'm just a piece of this, and I don't really have a whole heck of a lot of value. That's one of the reasons why you take the auto industry as a side comparison. That's why everyone still continues to praise Toyota over most other auto manufacturers, because they provide the autonomy, even if it's this much, to completely stop their entire line. Like, yep, you're going to problems. Like, if you see something that's bad, you have every right to be an individual and take action on it.
Yep. The red button problem.
The red button, which most industries can't handle that, because they're super numbers focused, and not even industries, I should say, just companies.
Yeah.
Because I would almost argue that we might not know them all, but there are your outliers in every industry.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny you bring up the red button problem. You had introduced me to the red button problems a year and a half ago or what have you, and I had attached to that right away because I had made the joke very early on in saying when we're creating this company, technically there's a corporation, but we're not really following this quote unquote corporate model, because it is maintaining autonomy and actually individuality and business ownership. And I mean, there's more to it than just saying the word corporate. But that was always my concern. Is I was like, okay, if you start to have a corporate infrastructure, even if it's a managerial infrastructure, you're not saying corporate in the sense that we're owning all these practices, but maybe there's a management element to it. The concern I always had was a ground floor employee who really sees that there is an innate problem in process. And that's one of the big things we focus on all the time is a process and procedure and policy, we're looking for, individuals and leaders who can look at broad topics. And we kind of talk about the A, B, C, D employee, where you can let out rough guidelines and they can function within those. It's the A1, A2, A3, A4, and B1, B2, B3, B4, those employees. Those are very, very difficult to maintain because they want everything laid out for them. And I think looking at those employees and saying, well, from a hierarchy standpoint, is if we have all these people where all they do is just want to ask questions, I'm sorry, not ask questions, but look for direction, look for direction, look for direction, look for direction, you can tell that person has lost autonomy.
Yeah.
They have really lost through the education system, through whatever system they have been in. It's just like, well, what do I do now? What do I do now? What do I do now? So getting back to, the original point here was that, I had this fear in a managerial system, in a corporate system, or whatever it happens to be, is this red button, and saying, well, what happens if we have this ground floor employee see something, and what is the chain of command they have to get through in order to get that red button heard? Is it just a little clicker, or is it a huge tornado siren where it's like, no, there is a problem here? And I had made the statement one time that if there was ever a circumstance where there was a significant red button problem from that employee to me, and that problem got stifled out somewhere, and we started to fail on patient care, we started to fail on caregiver compliance, we started to fail on our education process because that person identified a problem. They may not have had a solution. That's the big takeaway here. You don't have to have solutions when you identify problems. It's helpful if you have solutions to the problems.
Absolutely.
But the thing is, if we have identified that problem, everyone between me and that person gets fired. Because if there was someone who stopped along the way that there was a legitimate problem in process that was affecting patient care, that was affecting, whatever it was in that capacity. And of course, it was just me bolstering. It's not like I would fire everyone between me, but it proves a point in saying, why is it that in a hierarchy system, which a hierarchy system doesn't work, but for me, I was very fearful of that and saying, what happens when we start to grow up on management or grow up on ownership or whatever that happens to be. And this is what we're talking about for a loss of self worth in our talent category is that because everyone is so ingrained into this hierarchy, everyone is so ingrained into what is the traditional American corporate environment of, managers to middle managers to, overseeing doctors to middle doctors, all the regional directors, all these different types of things. It's like, I think there is a time in which that system is functional. There is a need for certain parts of that, but it cannot come at the expense of individuality.
Right.
It cannot come at the expense of self-worth. It cannot come at the expense of, obviously, mental well-being.
Well, and the thing is, you can do both, but it requires a lot more effort.
Absolutely.
Because the reason that the hierarchy exists and the reason that it's that individual chain of command, like if there is an issue, like, no, you go to this person. Again, it's something that we talked about, I believe, in our first episode. It's just control.
Right.
It's in control in this instance, I would bet, is mostly rooted in reputation management, which is completely unnecessary.
Probably, yes. Yeah, that's probably pretty accurate.
Because I've seen it in the past with working in other places where it's like, we don't hold that to yourself. We'll talk about it later.
Yeah.
Don't let everybody know.
Right.
We're just gonna hold this. We're just gonna hold this in this little box.
Compartmentalize it. Right.
And we're gonna tote it up to upper management so that they can curb it as much as they have to.
Right.
Which to me, at least in working in the clinic, it doesn't happen that often, thankfully. But there have been moments where we've made mistakes.
Right.
And the first thing I do is I tell the caregiver, the customer, if you will, that we made a mistake and that we're going to fix it.
Right.
Like our reputation is not rooted on how well we hoity-toity ourselves all over the place.
No.
And what that does is like in a traditional structure, I wouldn't fit. I don't.
Yeah, no, I don't. I know I wouldn't.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
That would be something that would be generally frowned upon. Like, why are you telling them that? They don't need to know that there was an error. We'll just fix it, and then they can leave. There's a lack of humility. Even you can throw that in that. But what that does for me, if I were in that, and I've been in that structure in different worlds, is it's like, I don't want to be here.
Yeah.
I don't matter. No. I just don't matter. And that's to me, that's again all rooted in a loss of self-worth. And then guess where my talent goes?
Yeah.
Elsewhere.
Yeah, somewhere.
I might still show up because I have to do this, but I'm not invested anymore.
Yeah, and I think you touch on a very, very interesting point, is that, when we were talking about culture, we were talking about bond spectrum, and we were talking about financial, not spectrum, but the financial spectrum. Yeah, we were.
Yep.
I think when you start to talk about the hierarchies, you're exactly right, is that it bleeds, like hierarchy bleeds over into so many different aspects if you are rooted in a hierarchical system. And I think looking at that, you're exactly right, is saying when there's a complaint, when there's a problem, when there's a mistake, it's when you have this hierarchy, it's like a parental based system. It's like, well, I don't want them to find out because I might get in trouble. And it's I think one of the things I've learned over the years is it's like it actually has nothing to do with the mistake at all.
Right.
It has everything to do with honesty and a solution. Some of the veterinarians that I've worked with, associate veterinarians at the clinic, it's like, I did tell them this, but it wasn't like, now that we're rounding, it wasn't exactly right. What do I do? What do I tell them? Just tell them what we just said.
Yeah.
Say I had originally anticipated that this is what it was, but I talked to one of the other senior veterinarians, or I talked to one of the other veterinarians here. We talked about the case, we talked about what it was, and we actually think this is going to be a better management strategy. And people are like, well, that's fantastic.
Right.
And they're like, I wasn't expecting them to say thank you. And it's like, right, but that because you're being honest and you're being truthful. I said, no one has, do the wrong thing, send them out the door, and try to convince them you've done the wrong thing, but it was right.
Right.
Never going to go well.
No, because then you're essentially lying at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
No place for that.
And I've seen so many things over the years where things have transferred into us where, and I think that's when we start talking about after hours medicine, right? Because that's where the majority of my experience is into the 90th percentile in after hours medicine. That's always one of the things that's very alarming to veterinarians. When to send a case in, one that maybe wasn't managed as well as it could have been, that comes into our door. yours. And it's like, well, I make the joke. I say, I have the gift of hindsight. I get to see everything they did that didn't work, which means these two things right here are the last two things left. And I just have to make a 50-50. Whereas that veterinarian who was sending it in, they actually had 10 different variables that they had to try to work through on the same budget, right? Because whatever problem it is from beginning to end on that budget, it's the same amount of money. Money's going to run out eventually. And so they're trying to work within that to get from 10 problems. And then I just luck out that when they come in, there's 2 problems left. And I think it's probably that one. It's like, oh my God, how'd you know? They did all the work.
Right.
But the fear is when that transfers in, it then has the opportunity to make that veterinarian, their normal veterinarian, look bad because again, this, sort of hierarchical system, we're afraid of judgment. We're afraid of, well, he's better than me. He's above me. He's above me. And it's like, that's not the point. So people say, well, why didn't my veterinarian figure this out? I said, well, actually, your veterinarian figured out a lot of what it wasn't. I said, this is a normal process. I would have been thinking the same exact things as your veterinarians. I just have the gift of hindsight. And then they kind of chuckle a little bit.
Yeah.
I think people still do get upset that they spend money, and that not all the time, but they do. But again, I think you touched on an interesting point, that this loss of self-worth, it starts in school, but it continues to perpetuate throughout your career. Is that when we have this hierarchical system where maybe there's someone above us, we're talking the practice owner, we're talking maybe another associate veterinarian who's been there longer, we're talking maybe the practice does have specialists or whatever happens to be, is it always just seems like you never have enough. You never have enough to really make a great decision. Maybe you can make an okay decision, but damn, I really wish I would have had that great one. And that's one of the big things when we get, associate veterinarians, part-time veterinarians in, mentees in, whatever it happens to be. That's one of the biggest things we focus on, is it's just about making decisions. It's just about taking a subset of variables, just make a decision about it, live with that decision and move forward. And it's even to bleed over into some of the consultations I have with people regarding euthanasia. As I tell people, euthanasia sucks. The coin that is euthanasia, on flipping the coin of euthanasia, it sucks. On one side of that coin, you will have an individual who they euthanize, and then they're just completely regretful that they didn't try. The other side of the coin is someone who tried, and they are incredibly regretful that they even tried, because look at all this suffering I had my patient go through. It's the same thing. Both sides of the coin suck.
Yeah.
So when it comes to making a decision, especially a decision as a technician, a decision as a veterinarian, a decision as medical support staff, that decision-making process, it kind of, in a certain degree, really sucks if you have no self-worth, because all you're doing is doubting yourself all the time on basic stuff. The fundamentals by which I practice medicine, I always tell people you get one test and you get 3 rule-outs. One test and 3 rule-outs.
Okay.
So the way that I was taught medicine was your physical examination and clinical history provides 90% of the information you need to arrive at a diagnosis.
Okay.
So if in one test you can't come up with 3 rule-outs, you either didn't do a good enough physical exam or you didn't have enough clinical history. Now, that's not always true. That's just how I was sort of taught medicine. There are always statistical outliers in that capacity. But again, when we start to look at saying the decision-making process sucks, for me, to say I am not great at arriving at a diagnosis. I am not great at one of these doing surgery. I am not great. I am not great. I am not great. The only thing I hear, I can learn how to make a better diagnosis.
Right.
I can learn how to get a better clinical history. I can learn how to do better surgery. I can learn how to slow down. I can learn how to, acknowledge the capabilities of the staff. I can learn how to do these things. And that's part of when we look at, what it is for us as our accountability ladder.
Yeah.
It's like, what is it here? Not the accountability ladder, but the empowerment dynamic is sort of coming out of that self-victimization. I mean, this is kind of talking about the mentorship program, but I think it still is us just kind of talking about the hierarchy in that whole process and saying, no, we have learned for years and years and years and years, and schools and everything else that we've been through is that this hierarchical system bleeds over into so many different things. And when we start to talk about this loss of self-worth and we start to talk about this hierarchical system, is we're going to victimize ourselves. That is the natural progress.
Right. Well, but what you're talking about in terms of I think that there is in terms of just human nature, especially that now it is being empowered culturally across the board, is that there is a natural tendency that most of us have to say what outside variable caused this to go poorly for me.
Yes.
Which you and I refer to as victimization.
Yep.
How am I powerless?
Yep.
in the cases of creating a diagnosis and that level of self-doubt, that does bleed completely into that because what outside variable is going to make me powerless in this? What am I not seeing that is not providing me the confidence to make this decision? Make the decision. I can't do it because I'm missing something, and now I'm just perpetuating this victimhood.
Right.
But to go, what you're talking about in saying that all you see is opportunity is that's a skill set.
Yep.
That's different from a tendency. That is an active thought path that if you're not taught it, you're not born with. To me, you're not born with it. I don't know anybody that is. Whereas there is a portion. I'm not a psychologist. I don't know exactly how brains work, but to me, the victim response, I think, would actually be more rooted into a biological response, fight or flight.
Oh, absolutely. Well, we're even talking about the fact that we're in a survival environment.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
You're always on that edge.
You're
and if you're a
constantly.
flight person,
Yes.
it's just going to be what's going to screw me this time.
Absolutely.
And how do I get out of it? And how do I fight it?
Yep.
So if I'm always on that edge, and I'm in fight or flight mode, even without realizing it, the perpetuation of this victim state is very, very easy to do.
Absolutely.
So now,
and probably has been a defense mechanism for quite some time.
Absolutely.
Not defense, but a coping mechanism.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
For quite some time. Yep.
So you take all of that, and then you provide. I would guess that the majority of your veterinary students in their undergraduate were biology, pre-vets, very STEM
science,
STEM,
yeah.
and then they get into vet school, and it's very localized. This is what you're learning.
Yeah.
Where in that process are you learning the skill set of managing your mindset?
No, you don't.
You don't. No. You hope you got it from your parents or a friend or some other life's influence. But there's
if you actually had at a younger age, if you had access to therapy or you had access to those like coping mechanisms as a taught mechanism.
Right. But even still, like I graduated with a marketing degree. I never got any of that.
No.
I mean, I got close to it when I took a sales class because basically all it was is, hey, you're going to miss 90 times out of 100. And you just got to get used to it.
Yeah,
Buck up,
mental
buttercup.
fortitude. Yeah.
But that was it. Then that was light exposure, and that was the one professor that was probably a little bit rogue. He was, in colleges or highly liberal institutions. He was extremely conservative.
Sure.
He didn't really get along with most of the other professors.
Probably not.
One of my favorite guys.
Sure, absolutely.
But that was the only exposure that I had to that in a business school for a marketing degree, which there is a high degree of failure.
Yeah.
Whereas in the but I think it's just generally more accepted if you go into the industry and you're marketing and you fail. If you're a vet, the tolerance for failure is a touch lower than if you're handling the marketing budget for Sears.
Sure. Right.
So I don't know anywhere personally in terms of a higher education structure that is providing the exposure to this thought pattern of this is how this works. You just gotta tough through it.
Well, yeah, and I think it kind of brings us to our next point is this deteriorating skill set.
Right.
Is again, if you look at the industry overview and how we have that set up is now again the deteriorating skill set is very it's very, very close to our service, our lack of infrastructure. So those two things are related. In the next video, we will talk about our lack of infrastructure from a service standpoint. But as it's related to this deteriorating skill set, you're exactly right. Is there may have been a time where from mental fortitude, or like you said, the skill set of the problem solving, and actually being able to go from saying, here's some variables I'm not good at, this is opportunity for growth. Let's look at veterinary school in the 70s versus in the 80s, the 90s, the thousands, and now the 10s and getting close to the 20s here pretty quick, is the amount of information that the veterinary curriculum has to have in a 4-year time period is drastically different. And that's part of, again, I was recognizing that it's really in the last 30 years that the profession has developed. So there was probably a time where veterinary school education wise was a little bit slower, not necessarily less intense, because it is still a very thought provocative profession. However, there's probably the opportunity for students to talk more with university advisors, university officials, mentees, people that they had worked with before. I mean, there was at least a degree of downtime, I guess is a better way of putting it, but there's no downtime now.
Right. Well, yeah, because you're talking about the education system has a 10% acceptance rate.
Yeah.
They're at maximum capacity all the time. There's no extra time when you're at max.
No, absolutely. And it's just move through, learn what you need to know, and out you go.
And figure it out on your own after that.
Yep. And what we're learning is that we're losing ourselves, is we're losing our self-worth, we're losing our individuality. And when you start to look at this deterioration in the skill set, is we're not necessarily talking about you may or may not know how to neuter a cat, because there are certainly times where veterinary students coming out have done one in their entire 4-year curriculum, and it's now you have to go do 100 this month for all the clients that we have, or whatever it turns out to be. So there is a thing where there's some basic skills that are not unanimous, but the reality is when we talk about deteriorating skill set, we're talking about a skill set to enter into today's veterinary profession. This is a recurring theme that has come up as we've gone through our industry overview, is that where today's veterinarian needs to be, we don't have the skills. We're not being taught the skills. We're not acquiring those skills. We don't even have an avenue if we wanted to self-teach the skills. And that's, of course, where part of this PAWCast comes from, to even try to acknowledge that there are so many variables we have to look at any given time between the cultural issues and service issues, and even as mental health. I mean, all these different things. The profession culturally in America has moved so much faster. So pet ownership has gone so much faster than this traditional practice.
Yeah.
So for us, people have an expectation of way out here, but the skills we enter into the market with are years behind, decades behind.
And as soon as they challenge it, as soon as a caregiver challenges where you stand, the tendency and the taught because of the disparagement that's in the education system is stand your ground.
Yes, right.
Don't go that way. Yeah. Stay in the middle of the hurricane.
Yep, stay in that hurricane. Move with the storm.
Just take the shit.
Yep.
Like, it's not as bad as getting plunked by a 2x4 in the wind.
Right, exactly.
Just deal with it.
Stay right there. Keep moving with it, because this is where we are. This is where we're safe. But the skill set, honestly, is so multifactorial. The skill set has so many different unique parts to it that I think what we're starting to acknowledge is, again, with this kind of new up and coming generation of veterinarians, is I give them absolutely all the credit in the world for, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to deal with that particular problem. How can we say I don't want to say necessarily customer service aspect to it, but there are certain parts of management where it's like, I don't want to have to deal with interpersonnel problems. Yeah. I'm not a person manager. I don't even have the skills to deal with this one particular point. And it comes back to veterinarians, veterinary technicians, being okay with setting boundaries.
Yeah.
I'm not good at this. I don't want to do it.
Right.
Whereas the tradition is, I'm not good at this. Good luck figuring it out.
Yeah.
Right. It's sort of what you have to deal with now.
Yep.
And that's where I think when we say, a deterioration in the skill set, is that some of those interpersonnel interactions. Now, we're not saying you necessarily have to know how to manage people, but you really should know how to work within a team.
Right.
And you should know how to work within a multi-personality team. People who don't have the same political views as you, people who, and I think, again, generally speaking, most of the people in the veterinary profession are very similar.
Absolutely.
There's, probably some little leeway here or there, but for the most part, we're, a pretty easygoing and good set of professionals. But again, it's come down to this skill set of, you just need to have the pieces to be able to function within the team. You need to have the pieces to get close to a diagnosis, accept failure, learning that once you fail, it's an opportunity to learn. But again, this does very much lead into our cultural issues. I mean, it's a bleed over into culture from the human animal bond aspect, how much you are going to take on the emotional distress of this particular case, whether or not you had an impact on it. And this was no joke. My first boss, right out of vet school, he had helped me with that same thought. It's like, well, being able to accept failure within a diagnosis or being able to accept failure within a service or what it happens to be is right out of school. I didn't know what I wanted to be. I mean, at that point, yes,
right after vet school. I don't know what I want to be. I just did this for 7 years. Right. I guess I might do this.
Yeah, I mean, 6, not to split hair, but anyway, and I just
split hairs.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. But no, I mean, the reality is, day practice. I mean, because there's public and private practice. So the FDA, USDA. I mean, that's one track you can go. Of course, private practice is your traditional veterinary job, and then for me, it was a matter of day practice versus after hours care and so on and so forth. And really, what drove me into emergency medicine, I don't know if I told you this before, but it was no joke. When I was in veterinary school, what I learned was that when I would study all night and I would sleep, that I'd lose all the information I just studied. Mm-hmm. So what I would do is I would just study all night. I'd take my test in the morning, then sleep all day.
Yeah.
So for the entire veterinary curriculum, I was basically just up all night, and I was like, oh my God, I have to get up for a day practice. There's no way I can be to work by 8 o'clock. It's just, that's when I go to bed. That's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. So when I interviewed at my first job as an after hours veterinarian, I said to my employer, as I said, listen, I mean, you see my resume, like I'm just 3 weeks out of school. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I don't know how to do emergency medicine. And he said to me, and I mean, it really rang true. And it's kind of weird to even say out loud, but he says, well, just think of it this way. If you weren't here, if something was going to die, I was probably going to die anyway. And I was like, oh,
yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess you're right. It's kind of empowering to be like, well, I just have to try to do better than this thing dying. Mm-hmm. And at that point, I had a really good group of people around me. Dr. Christie and some of the other ones, when I started my first job, very influential in my early career. It was just try to keep it alive into the morning, because you got a great doctor coming on in the morning, and she can help you sift through a lot of this. And that was essentially part of how I envisioned sort of the mentorship program, and sort of what we're doing in our tier 3 mentorship is that exact dynamic. Is it's like, I didn't know much. Yeah, I was kind of arrogant. Sometimes I would really stick to my guns on knowing a diagnosis. She'd be like, Carlo, that's not what it, just stop. And I'd be like, all right, and it was tough, I mean, and she really, honestly, I to this day, I think about her because a part of it was that she stood between me and some of the other doctors in the practice. She stood between me and some of the technicians in the practice who really he doesn't get it. He's an idiot. He's stupid. And it's hierarchy.
Yeah.
Coming at you in practice. He doesn't know. She's like, guy, he's just out of school.
Right.
What is your expectation of this new graduate who 3 weeks out of school is now running an emergency practice after hours by himself?
Yeah.
Like, what do you actually think is going to happen? And she was one of the first people in the veterinary profession who stood up for me. Mm-hmm. And that's when we start to talk about this loss of self-worth. It doesn't take much. It doesn't take much. If someone starts to believe in you and someone really is like, you know what, you can do this. And that's my perspective. Like, I have done this against everything. I shouldn't have been able to do this. Mm-hmm. And I had good people around me, and I had good supportive people. But again, that comes back to just our discussion of this loss of self-worth and this deteriorating skill set. Is I came out of school with a skill set that in no way, shape, or form prepared me for the job that I had. Mm-hmm. It was in a system that was beset in hierarchy. And for me, it was, I had the people around me that were supportive, not everybody, but I had 1 or 2 key players. And that made all the difference in the world to help me start to develop those skills.
It's funny too. I know it's not, it's slightly connected. It's not a direct connection, but that what you just referred to there in that person that just didn't really provide you the opportunity to feel sorry for yourself.
Yes.
That goes with what Dr. Caroline was bringing up a couple weeks ago, and that and
one
that,
of our associate vets.
Yes. Yep. That concept, and I understand that within that structure, there is a lot of nuance. Like, you could have created the opportunity to feel sorry for yourself very, very easily. Mm-hmm. That person basically held you by the leash and said, nah, you don't have time for that.
Yep.
You're not going over there.
No.
So when she, and I respect Dr. Caroline very, very much, because she does challenge us on these ideas a lot.
Yeah.
But
I love it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But that's the reason why my natural response is I don't give an inch. No, you're just not going to go over there. I understand that there is nuance in this argument. I understand that your life is a very dynamic thing, and there's a lot of gray area. But what I'm going to be is I'm going to be the person that's just going to hold that leash.
Yep.
If you really want to pull hard enough where I let go of that leash, you're free to go wherever you please.
Correct.
But guess who's not going to help anymore?
Correct.
It's probably going to be me.
Yeah, I'm not chasing a running dog.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
So if you had bucked that individual to the point where it was like, I'm going to go do this. I'm going to go explore all these other people and how they're going to make me feel sorry for myself.
Yep.
She would have said, okay.
Yep.
Good luck.
That's what you're going to do.
Peace.
Right. Yep.
It's been great knowing you, but you're going to be out in 7 years.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the end of it.
Yeah.
So it's funny that we can bring it back to that, because I don't think she was referring to a quote unquote skill set in any way specifically, but that's exactly what it is having an individual within a practice that has the skill set to hold the leash.
Yep.
Because man, is that uncomfortable sometimes.
Yeah, it is tough. It's tough. And I think, for us, we have, as we start to get into our discussion of core values and we start to talk about our performance review system and these growth plans and so on and so forth, is, really sort of the fundamentals that I had learned from Christy very early on in my career is it does bleed through, where it's like, no, like you said, just hold the leash, just be accountable to it. Nope, this isn't what this is. Yep, that was a mistake, but we're going to do better next time. It was a completely different way of looking at a set of problems.
Yeah.
And that, again, something that wasn't learned, part of that deteriorating skill set. It's just, you don't know what just happened. You didn't do a good job and this patient suffered as a result. And this is as a student. And then you just kind of like go walk off into a corner and cry.
Right.
I was working with the local humane society here just the other day, and it was super simple. It was I had an employee that I just needed them to go grab a pair of clippers for me, and we're sitting there with a patient just waiting for the clippers. And she had run into another room, and then it's just like, well, where is she? It's like, where'd she go? And I'm just sort of waiting, and I'm like, I gotta go find her. Maybe she couldn't find it. I think I had another pair of clippers somewhere else. She was on the phone.
Okay.
And I'm like, what? And she got off the phone or whatever. And I'm like, why are you on the phone? She's like, well, the phone rang. And I was like, well, but we were dealing with a patient. Like, what would happen if the phone didn't ring? Well, it would go to voicemail. Are you the only one here who can check the voicemail? No, it's not. I can, anyone can answer the voicemail.
Right.
So the task at hand was I needed you to focus on this 1 minute task. We had to get the clippers because we needed to use it for patient care. And it's like, well, what about all these other sort of things? And we sort of these other sort of things. And it's like, and it's a really good example of it, just how we sort of get sidetracked when we don't have the skill set to identify what is the most important right now. We don't have the ability to really make great decisions about, we don't have the ability of once we make decisions, was it a good or bad decision? And then when we get feedback, it's a crush.
Yeah.
And that was sort of then my interaction with his employee and the clippers and the phone call is it was like, this is not a crush. I mean, it was clippers. I mean, who cares? Just go to clippers. But the lesson that we were able to teach from that was we need to start to work on what is our 1 second priority, our 1 minute priority, our 1 hour priority, our 1 day, our 1 week, our 1 month, or 1 year. And that's going to basically start to allow us to function within the workplace as a team. Because if you have that one team member who's like, I'm gonna go treat this patient. Okay, perfect. I am relying on you to treat this patient. And then it's like, well, really what I meant was after I go to the bathroom, and then after I eat something, and then after I go over here, and then after I'm gonna go answer the phone, and then I'm gonna go over here and do this, and then I'm gonna go over here, and it's like an hour and a half later, and someone else has already done the treatment on this particular patient. It's like, well, why didn't they do treatments? They said they were going to do treatments,
Right.
And it's like, oh, well, maybe this is an individual who their skill set does not allow them to identify what is immediate priority and what is a later priority. And that's what we are teaching in our organization as far as triage.
Right.
What patient is most immediate? What patient is less immediate? What urgent to emergent to stable to surgical to medical is to work through this type of process on the deteriorating skill set of, if we're talking about hierarchy, which is again one of our problems. We talk about hierarchy where we always have to sort of ask where what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And then it comes into I don't have the skills to figure it out.
Yeah.
And anytime I ask someone in a position of perceived power where they're above me and I'm constantly asking, they're like, why are they talking to me? Why are they talking to me? Why are they talking to me?
Yeah.
Then it's just this constant perpetuating circle. And I think, again, bringing it back to Dr. Caroline and sort of the argument on this ambiguity of this gray area in some of these arguments. on saying, well, there's this factor and there's this factor and there's this and this might and this might and this might and this might is, and we can display this graphic as well, but when we start to talk about our empowerment dynamic and we start to talk about our accountability ladder, and we, Ben and I, and of course other leaders, on our team are really into that high tier of just, we're owning problems, we're seeing what the solutions are, and we're implementing them. When you are in a phase of high accountability and all you're doing is just talking about, find the solution, but what are we implementing? What's the solution? What are we implementing? What are the solution? What are they implementing? Every other if, then, but gray area, it doesn't matter.
No.
It doesn't matter, and it's so crazy. And I mean, I thank you for teaching me that, because I mean, in the last few years, that's you really helped me come through on. Because I mean, like with with Dr. Caroline's argument, well, there's this factor, there's this factor, there's this factor, there's this factor. It's taken me years to sort of finally see it, and I know in the last year I have. But it's in this accountability ladder, it's like we have denial and blaming and excuses, and we're waiting to see if it even becomes a problem. I know I made a mistake, but maybe no one will notice. And we start to that's where we're kind of talking about this deteriorating skill set. Is at one of the first things we had was, it's like, I want to be the best in my field so I can make everyone else with me better, and then I'm going to try to be better than them again because I want them to come with me.
Right.
It's all the same stuff.
Yeah.
This deterioration of skill set and this hierarchy, that's it.
Well, yeah. So do you have the ladder in there? Is that what you're
that's
looking
it right
at
here.
there?
Yep.
So, and I'll throw it up on the screen too, is that when I think of that survival mode that we had alluded to, what is survival mode? It's all down there.
It's on the bottom.
Because if I do all those things, I might survive.
Yeah.
I never even thought about that until right now. It's like, that's survival mode.
That's survival mode.
And you're on especially with number 4, you're on a whim.
Yeah. And actually, that's the eye of the storm is number 4. Eye of the storm in this weight category on our accountability ladder here, just so you guys know, it is people here recognize that there is a problem, but have chosen to not act and hope that the problem will either disappear or improve without their action.
Right.
So it's like, that's kind of the eye of the storm.
Yeah.
You're in survival mode. It's like, all right, I'm just gonna kind of wait and see, and then and you're exactly right.
And the key verb in that statement is hope.
Hope.
It's not act. It's hope, and it was very appropriate that our first episode is a call to action.
Yes,
it's not a call to hope.
No.
No,
we've been hoping for about 15 years,
and I'm tired of it.
Yes,
I still have, and I'm not nearly as in depth or in deep with this industry as you are.
Sure.
I still have I personally have a lot of hope for the industry as a whole, because I believe it's there. I believe that the individuals that find themselves in this industry, as a general rule of thumb, based on the way that they're motivated and the way that they behave, have a lot of natural strengths that lend itself to a high degree of hope and also a high degree of being able to implement solutions.
Absolutely.
They just don't have the skill set to do that,
to make that bridge,
because
span that gap.
The thing that the ladder of accountability is built on is the thing that, to me, when you talk about being the lowest and going to the highest, the thing that's missing the most out of that is the fundamental root of forgiveness and humility, which we'll explore later. But that's, when you talk about, is it an internist that runs the medical side? I don't remember the exact title. But regardless, like that, the individual that you referred to, like your first few days of clinicals when you were in college, that just took you right off of your soapbox. Like, you're never gonna make it. You're awful. They gave you the Marine type treatment with no warning. Never expected it. You go to Marine boot camp, you see it coming. Like, I know I'm gonna get slaughtered.
You signed up for Marine boot camp,
right? Yep. You don't sign up for that in vet school, and the I don't know if there's much of a mirror image when I think of a person who signs up for vet school and a person who signs up for Marine boot camp.
Right.
Like, they're very, very different people as a general rule of thumb.
Yes.
So you take so you get crushed off of that. What does that teach you? It teaches you that when you get above somebody, the lack of humility is completely acceptable. I'm better than you. I don't need to hear you. You need to be better. I have no requirement to forgive you in any way.
Right.
I gave you the opportunity to succeed. You failed. You're gone.
Yep.
And to me, that is so asinine.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny you bring up the military analogy, because I actually used to say in my first few years out it's like the main difference between veterinary school and the armed services is that with boot camp, they break you down to they break you down to build you back up, whereas in veterinary school you just get broken.
Right.
And then it's off you go.
There's no rebuild.
Yep, no rebuild. No rebuild. And it's just, and then you're just kind of lost. And again, we're talking about like the elite intelligence of, well, that particular year and that particular application process, but we're talking really top tier STEM students, where it's the smart to the smart to the smart to the 10%.
Yeah.
And it's like, and then what we're going to say is we're going to take that 10% and break it out. Now the 10% is our 100%. And now we're going to say, well, most people are going to fall well under that, maybe in the lower 40th percentile of the ultra smart, and then we're really getting up to these top tier, hierarchy specialists. And that's, like, oh, I'm just so much smarter. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, honestly, anyone would be that smart if you were doing that job for 20 years on end.
Right.
I mean,
are you smart because of your brain, or are you smart because of experience?
Right. So
those are two different things.
Well, and that's actually one of the I think the funny recurring jokes about millennials is it's like a job application process, a new graduate with 10 years of experience.
Yeah.
Yep.
I love that joke.
It doesn't exist, and how am I supposed to get a job in this market? And that's, I think, when we start to talk about, I mean, it's jokes about deteriorating skill set and hierarchy and so on and so forth. But, that is very much a reality. And, where there's this expectation of knowing more, but you haven't had the opportunity to experience more. And there hasn't been, a traditional education system. Maybe they don't have the experience to teach you what you need.
Right. The other thing, too, that goes along with that, and I've had this argument with some of my friends, and not even so much argument, just discussion. And I'll, have that little revealing thought about your personal life is like, you take a game like Warhammer.
Sure. Right.
So Carlo plays Warhammer. He's on a hiatus or whatever it might be. But for those that aren't familiar, Warhammer is a war game.
It is
a tabletop war game.
That
it's a highly strategic game.
Yep.
So take that as an example. Take if you were, let's say you were applying for a surgical type position, and you are like really good at playing video games.
Right.
Very quick,
tactile.
very tactile. Whatever. You have like for me, my special skill, I was in a band for 9 years.
Yeah.
Like you want to learn how to communicate, learn how to be in a band when you're 16 years old, because all you do is just almost fist fight the whole time. But taking those extra skill sets and saying like that, going back to that, I need 10 years of experience for a new graduate.
Right.
Well, this is the experience that I have.
Right.
And honestly, most of those, in my opinion, are highly valuable. I actually grab more to the experiences that I've had in my personal life, at least 4 times to every one that I pull from my college education.
Absolutely.
I had to unlearn most of my college education because it was horribly unapplicable.
Yeah.
Again, marketing, very different from veterinary school. You're learning a trade. Yeah. You're going to be able to draw a lot more just knowledge off of that. Yeah. And I do use my degree enough to say, that was a good idea.
You're right.
But in terms of like practical life skills,
No,
playing something like Warhammer or even Smash Bros, whatever the heck it might be, it's you just learn the concept of and honestly the strategy and problem solving.
No, I completely agree. I mean, I do, and I have often made the joke. I mean, I'm just a gamer through and through, and I mean, with having just years of video game experience, like my sort of adoption of ultrasound technique, like being an ultrasonographer, it was fast.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, here's a screen I'm looking at, and I move my hand and I move it. Yep, no problem. And it was like, have you ever done this before? No, I've played a shit ton of video games though. And it's like, but like you said, there are other games that are strategic.
Right.
And tabletop wargaming, I mean, you have to understand your opponents, you have to understand movement, you have to understand all these different variables. There's a random variable, so you have to calculate all these things at any given time. And I remember when I first started playing tabletop wargaming, when I think it was like junior in high school or something like that, is it's like we would have these matches that would take 6 hours.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's a 1 hour game, and it's that same process. It's highly analytical, trying to just understand the rules of the game, because the rule book's this thick. I mean, the veterinary profession rule book is massive, but there isn't really, actually the rule book that was probably written in the 80s and 90s, and then we still trying to use that rule book, and PAW Health is creating a new rule book.
Time for a new edition.
It's a new edition, right? We're revising it. Actually, we're probably just burning it and creating a new one. But anyway, so that was kind of that whole idea, is this sort of skill set, and then over the years you become better at it. For a game now, it's 30 minutes.
Right.
So it's kind of that same idea where even in your personal life to your professional life, there's going to be times where you don't have a skill set for something. You're either going to figure it out, or you're going to have mentors to help you, or you're just simply not going to do it and you're going to go do something else. Like for me, terrible with any type of musical instrument. Like I can't keep pace. I can't keep rhythm. Tried it, sucked, done. Yeah. And that's where, like I said, I think bringing it back to one of the things I said originally is I think that's one of the commendable things about today's generation, the millennials, is that they are willing to accept what they can't do.
Yes.
And if there's a system in place that allows them to be supported within that system, that's what we're talking about with PAW Health.
Yeah.
Is we're talking about creating a system, whether that system is in writing form, whether it's an individual form, whether it's a management form and financial form, whatever it happens to be. We're talking about identifying the problems and creating solutions and helping that deteriorating skill set. And I think with that, it brings us sort of to that final third bubble, or that sort of third piece to our loss of self-worth, is debt to income ratio.
Yeah.
It is brutal.
Yeah.
It is brutal.
That's got to be top. I mean, when you think of the status of any veterinarian, that's top 3 stressors for almost all of them.
Absolutely. Well, and
actually, it's just students in general nowadays too.
Yeah. And now again, we won't have to get too political on what might happen with our student debt load, anything like that capacity. But I think if we look at
the federal problem has not been solved.
Correct. The federal problem has not been solved.
And you and I probably aren't going to fix it.
Yeah, no, I don't think we will. So, and that's actually funny you say it that way, because when we were starting to identify from sort of this loss of self-worth, we started talking about all these things, we started talking about all these solutions, is very early on in our working together as a strategic planner, it was like, Ben, we have to fix all of these things. These are all things that we need to do. And it's like, pump the brakes, Riolo.
Yeah.
Like, are we talking about an industry-wide problem, or are we talking about a problem in your clinic? Because you can't start to tackle industry problems until you fix the problem in your clinic. And then it even bubbles down from there, is you can't start to fix problems within your clinic until you can fix problems within inside yourself. And as soon as you can start to handle yourself, you can start to handle that, then you can start to branch out into helping others. And that's, of course, now where we are starting to step into the industry.
Right.
And trying to help, at least in some capacity, as much as
on the things that we handle. Because the things that we, like I myself don't have a strong grasp on, I don't step into that. You don't step into that. It's like, no, if I don't have the best possible answer that I can come up with, I'm probably not going to tell you what to do.
I've gotten a lot better at just close. I mean, this podcast probably is not very representative, but I have been very good at closing my mouth. I mean, just if I don't have an answer, I'm not going to ramble on until it's like I just
How
spit
much
words.
time was put into this thing? Like,
all right,
into the industry overview.
Into the industry overview.
Days. In terms of understanding and
for me,
yes.
Oh yeah,
days.
Well,
a lot.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to talk about the industry overview, I mean, we've kind of talked about, I don't sleep much, so like 4 to 6 hours, 2 to 4 hours, depending on the night. Actually, this last stint I was up for a day and a half, but it doesn't matter. Is like, for me, it's all I've thought about for 5 to 8 years.
Exactly.
I never stop thinking about it.
So you opening your mouth on this is not from an ill-fitting place.
No.
You trying to tell and this is probably the reason why the political environment is so bad, is because there's so many people that are just extrapolating based on a very small set of variables that what the big big solution is like, well, I'm just going to disagree with that, and I'm going to pick out this one point.
Right.
And then it's going to crumble. And it happens on both sides. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle you sit on.
Right.
That's what's so frustrating about it. But from this perspective, you're not opening your mouth.
No.
You're just providing information.
Framework. Yep. And that's where, again, I think, you're exactly right. I mean, I'm providing information, but right now all we're doing is overviewing the 3 major problems.
Right.
We haven't even got into solutions yet. And I think where we as a profession get stuck is, like you said, aisle problems, issues, and so on and so forth, is that all we ever ever do is really just start talking about these problems. And it's in that same accountability ladder is, we really haven't got into, are we really living in reality? Are we owning it? Are we owning it? Are we living in reality? Are we really kind of up into the top tiers where we're creating solutions and implementing? The answer is no. Is that if we've said that, on our chart, we've said that, number 4 is where the profession is. We're just sort of waiting and seeing. We're sort of in the eye of the storm. Are we really living in reality?
Right.
And if we're even from an accountability standpoint, if we haven't even gotten to that point, there's no way we're going to actually be able to own what these problems are and start to create solutions to it.
Right.
And that's where, like you said, on this, all what we're doing is we're providing information on these, but it's not just because we're kind of belly aching about it.
No.
Is that we do have very tangible solutions.
You just set the stage
Yeah.
so that the solutions have something to stand on.
Yeah.
That was the big reason, whenever this industry overview had surfaced itself amongst the group.
Yeah.
And you absolutely are these giant problems that do perpetuate throughout the entire industry and throughout the culture of the veterinary world. Yep. But what was my first question? What are you going to do about it?
Right.
The answer was fix it.
Right.
And like that was the best answer that you had in the moment. And it's like, I agree that you're going to fix it, but what are you going to do in the next 2 weeks? That's why the strategic planning model is so important.
Right.
Because it goes from, we'll just do it.
Right.
We'll just figure it out.
Right.
We're just going to do it. It's no.
Right.
We're going to be methodical about this, and you're going to lay it out, and we're going to get shit done.
Yeah. And I remember I was very frustrated in the beginning because I was like, just listen to me. This is what we need to do. I know we need to fix it. Like, this is going to happen. And you guys are like, what? I'm like, fine. I'm going to write this down and I'm going to create this overview.
Yeah.
And it was like, I remember when I had my torn pieces of paper that I was showing you and Jen, you guys were like, well, we've never had a client do this before.
No.
There's no one as geared in their industry with this type of an overview, in that regard. And, again, I think it's part of that skill set, as I've identified before. My skill is that I have problem solve. But yeah, I mean, it's the do, it's the how, it's the now, and that's getting back to my example with the Humane Society employee. 1 second, 1 minute, 1 hour, 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year. We have to start to base it and just think about it as like little file bins. Here's my 1 second bin. Here's my 1 minute bin. Here's my 1 thing bin. And then and once we start to pull it together, for me, it's like, what's my 5 to 10 year bin? How what can I pull down from there? What can I pull down from there? Can I pull this down? And I think when we start to talk about this loss of self-worth is, we all come out of veterinary school or technician school and you don't really have a ton of it. And I don't think there are probably some select instances where some people come out very empowered and maybe they had a good set of mentors, they had a good set of education, but that, again, is not the industry standard. But, when we start to look at, again, how we're moving forward with our organization, I mean, we've crushed our 10-year goals in the first 3, so it's just that same thing on saying, all right, why didn't we, what is holding a lot of veterinarians back? And that's, again, coming back into that debt to income ratio. When I look at saying, well, we have 1 year plans, 1 minute plans, 10-year plans, 5-year plans, whatever that happens to be, you can't have that in survival mode. I mean, we've identified that. You can't.
You're lucky to make it past the 1 week.
Yeah, 1 day. You can't make long-term determined when you're in sort of survival mode. So part of this is, yes, empowerment. But one of the big things that I think never really made sense to me is that debt does not dictate income. And, it's like I have, from one veterinary student to the next. So I'm graduating with 180,000 in debt. I'm 250, I'm 400,000 in debt. And I think we do, to a certain capacity, victimize ourselves with our debt. And it's saying, well, there is sort of a conscious component to this. Like, no one actually made you go to veterinary school. You knew what the debt load was going to be going in. Maybe you didn't. And I think as, a young kid, at 18 to 20 years old, 22 years old, it's very fake, where it's like, oh, 250,000, that sounds like a lot. But it's like, what does that actually mean for my monthly loan payment? How much is that? I mean, it's like $100 or something, right? And it's like, no, we're talking like clear past 1,000, 1,500, which is a really nice, like, mortgage payment on a nice house. But around here, central Wisconsin, you can get a lot of great properties, but there's a lot of those across America for semi-rural environments. And so that brings up the point of this debt to income, is this loss of self-worth. It's like, oh my God, look at how much debt I have. No bank will ever give me money for a business loan.
Yeah.
Look at how much debt I have. I need to just continue to work because if I stop working, then I won't be able to pay my debt. Look at how much debt I have. I'm never going to be able to pay this off in my lifetime.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so let's kind of create opportunity with that. So it's, you are never going to pay off $400,000 working as an associate veterinarian at $80,000 a year. It's financially just not going to happen. So what's the solution? The solution there is increase your income. Well, how do you increase your income? And it's like, well, maybe we need to start to talk about what ownership looks like. Maybe we need to start to talk about what leadership looks like. Well, I'm not a natural born leader. I'm not a natural born owner. And it's like, well, what we're coming forward with is there are certain aspects of ownership that you don't need to be responsible for. And it comes back to sort of those millennials and saying, I know what I don't want. I know what I don't want. I know what I don't want.
Yeah.
But if we're talking about a partner practice, if we're talking about partial ownership, I mean, there's other ways you can generate avenue. Is there a particular skill that you have in your area that no one else has? Are you an ultrasonographer? Can you start to bring that business in? Can you make a business pitch to your owner? Maybe you have no interest in being an actual owner, but can you say, you know what, I am really interested in physical therapy. There's no physical therapists around here.
Right.
I'm really interested in ultrasonography. There are no ultrasonographers around here. Will you help me? I don't want to be an owner of this practice, but actually I will help build your practice if you help me get my education for this. It's so many classes. I need a continuing education stipend. And you put together an actual business model.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's going to be too many veterinarian owners who are like, why would I be opposed to that? You know, there are going to be some that are rooted in tradition and saying, I, as an owner, do not see value in what you are telling me that you are interested in. And then the reality becomes time to find a new job.
Exactly. But it's clear.
Yes.
When you get that answer.
Yes.
There's
right.
a whole lot of clarity in the no.
The no, right.
The maybe is where people get frustrated.
It's true. We do love our maybes.
Yes.
We do love our maybes. But I don't think, for me, when we start to look at our value as veterinarians and we start talking about this debt to income ratio, it is very crushing. Don't get me wrong. I mean, that loan payment when it comes through is crushing.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying we shouldn't acknowledge that it doesn't weigh on us financially. However, there are other ways that we as veterinarians can make more money. We just have to start to think outside of this traditional box.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not saying I have the solutions to all the problems, but, I think when we start to talk about, well, I can't move because my, significant other has a job in this area and this is the only job that I can find. I think that's another common argument that we hear from veterinarians. And again, it is a very challenging one, but when we start to look at this overall loss of self-worth, where it's like, I have too much debt, I'm not making enough money, I'm not worth anything to the company I work for, and I don't have any skills to even do the job that I want to do. It's like, is that really a healthy environment for you to be in that business, in that company, in that location? And shouldn't the discussion with your significant other be mental wellness and well-being?
Right.
Can't we figure out some solution to you moving somewhere else for a job? I don't know. I'm just saying, is that an opportunity for some people? Maybe some people it is, but I think maybe for us as veterinarians, we're, kind of passive enough that we're not comfortable having that conversation because we're self-sacrificers. We don't want to inconvenience people.
Right.
But again, what's in the numbers is that we as veterinarians are constantly sacrificing, and it's coming at the expense of mental health and well-being.
Right. This to me is the tipping point, and this is a very brief explanation of the hard line, hold the leash approach that I take.
Yep.
I believe that given all of the sets of variables and you make a decision like yes, I have all of these things, my mental health is deteriorating, my financial state is not great, and I want to be here, so I'm choosing to be here with all of these variables, and you make that decision, my sympathy is now gone.
Yeah.
I don't feel bad anymore. So don't throw it back at me with this debt to income stuff. And like if you're operating with a high debt load and low income and you haven't done anything to problem solve it, like, you want answers?
Yes.
I'd love to help. Absolutely.
Yep.
But don't just use it as a tool to victimize yourself.
Right.
That's all I'm really getting at.
Yeah.
And that's why I take the hardline approach. It's just like, okay, I'm going to kind of assume that you see the variables that we're starting at number 5. I don't really deal well with 1 through 4. I don't have time. I personally don't have much of a concern for those that just want to live down there.
Yeah.
That's just me.
Yeah.
Other people are different, and you're okay with you're going to grab somebody by the head and you're going to pull them up.
Yeah.
And we share a difference in that, and I love the fact that you're willing to do that.
Right.
But all of these things is basically going to the big problem of talent is don't tell me that you have a lack of talent and that to make me feel bad for you.
Right.
Like, no, let's start to problem solve. Let's start to get better. Let's start to find where you're able to do all these things. Let's build your self-worth.
Yep.
That's all I want to do. I have every desire for you to be in a better place and feel as though you're in a better place.
Yeah.
And to do both of those things. I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that you're okay if you're not.
Correct.
And if you are in a better place, I'm going to tell you that you are. Like, even if it's small increments, like I'm going to compliment you. I'm going to provide a reward structure, whatever it might be. Don't throw these things back at me, though, and say, well, just feel bad for me.
Right.
No.
I
absolutely refuse to do that.
Yeah.
And to me, that's stemming from the culture side. And again, I tend to jump more overarching our society's culture.
Yep.
Is that so much of what we're doing, and I referred to it before, is like, where am I powerless?
Yeah.
Like we're just taught that. It's just ingrained into our system. Our
hierarchy.
Even our hierarchy, our media system is now like, this is how you're powerless today. Right. How are you being taken advantage of? How are you being victimized? And now we start to just peak for all of those things. And this is one of the big reasons why I don't really listen to the radio anymore. I never watch the news. I listen to podcasts. And one of the ones that I listen to most of the time, and I highly recommend everybody listen to if you can stomach his highly positive nature, is Gary Vee. Because he doesn't operate in the veterinary industry, so it's going to be some weird stuff. But what he refers to so often is like, all I do is see the good. All I am is gracious. All I am is thankful. Because everything that's gotten me to this point, the variability for me to get to this point, even if it's not great, has been excessively low for me to get to this exact point. And you want to know what? It might not be great, but I'm gracious for the fact that I can get better. And the fact that I got here in the first place, because I could have been dead a million other ways along the way.
Absolutely.
So that's my mindset on it. And to me, a lot of that links into the core value stuff. Because what Gary's referring to on that is humility. It's really all it is. And then getting into mentorship, when alluding to the solutions that we'll get to over coming weeks here, is that those two things are so taught. They're so you're not born with them. And now our culture as a whole is teaching people the other way, to basically teach. It's teaching us to degrade ourselves overall. To make ourselves more worthless, more powerless. There are the outliers here and there, but it's just irritating, and I just don't consume it. So I'm really excited to get. I'm really getting at is, man, I'm really excited to get into solutions, because now I'm kind of rambling. But that's really what I'm getting into with that.
No, I think it's like I said, getting back to the survival mode is that it's so easy to victimize ourselves in this. When you sort of have this overall loss of self-worth because you're just trying to get some type of empathy or sympathy from people at some point in some way. And I think debt is it does. I mean, don't get me wrong, the debt is a problem. But the solution is income. And I think, when we talk about the social element, so the cultural element, which is going to be the victimization part. And I think part of the solution process that has moved forward, unfortunately, is that what we've been seeing is a lot of students, a lot of veterinarians are starting to rush towards major city centers. St. Louis, Twin Cities, Chicago, Milwaukee, some of these. And it's like, if you move towards a large urban center where you have a really high top 20%, one of Katie's classmates moved to Boca Raton in Florida because it was not just a top 20%, but it's a massive amount of money in the top 20%. It's some of these solutions, where again, that may be isolated instance, but we're saying that a lot of veterinarians are moving towards sort of these, high salaried areas. I can, if I move to St. Louis, I can make $150,000 as a veterinarian. And it's like, are you comfortable paying $1,000 or $2,000 for a 1-bedroom apartment? Is that okay? Because it's your cost of living is going to be so much higher. And one of the things that, of course, we're coming forward with is that, again, we've kind of mentioned before, our area is semi-rural, really. I mean, it's barely urban. I mean, I think you just call it rural and be done with it. Yeah. Is that, for us to be able to say that in this one practice in North Central Wisconsin, that we've been able to have among the highest paid veterinarians in the area, to have the benefit structure of the entire staff equal to that of veterinarian, between continuing education to health benefits to medical benefits, health benefits for the families, to then our technical wages and our medical support wages. I mean, we are rushing towards the $15 minimum wage. I want technicians above 20 an hour. We're moving up in this rate of scale in an area where that is clearly above the standard pay of anyone else, not just in the industry, but like as a whole.
Yeah.
The typical income, and saying that, how are we doing this not in Seattle? How are we not doing this in California? How are we not doing this in these areas? And it's like, it's because we understand that debt is the nature of this game, but we have figured out a way to maintain income, not just for ourselves, but to distribute that to our staff.
Right.
Distribute that to our individuals. And that was the problem solved that we had come to, is that while, yes, I have definitely suffered all of the things in self-worth, between the deteriorating skill set to the hierarchy to the debt to income ratio, is that the solution is we're trying to come forward with, there are solutions to income. There's a lot of different solutions to income. You just have to be willing to work with it and kind of step outside of that comfort box. And then then there's the cultural element of it, is just don't continue to try not to allow yourself to be victimized. Right. But everything around you is victimizing, or is a lot, you're allowing yourself.
You're going to have fortitude every hour, every minute, every second of every day.
Yeah.
But that's with all of that too. That's what you're really referring to in terms of the problem solving. There was I'm assuming was the integration of the middle 60.
Absolutely.
So what that did was it took a limited market. If you were to stick with the traditional business model, because I think you probably could open up a couple more day practices in the greater Marathon County area.
Absolutely.
You could probably survive, thrive. Probably not. Hard to say. There's enough of a market where you could do some, but not to the point where I feel like you would solve that problem. Yeah. So that was the expansion. That was the, why don't we just be available? Right. Why don't we just be affordable? Why don't we just you're going to do more work along the way. But if it's going to solve this problem, if it's going to remove a stressor from your life, if you're going to have more self-worth, it's weird too that I'm not a vet. I've struggled with it in other industry, in previous careers and all that sort of stuff. I work up front. Right. When I'm in the clinic, right. The level of self-worth that I feel is astronomically higher when I'm the days that I'm there. Like, not to say that it wasn't there before, but it's like, holy crap, where did that come from? I was just here for 12 hours. I'm beat, and all I can think about is how I want to do it again. Doesn't make any freaking sense. It was literally the 4th of July. Yeah. I was driving home. Yeah. I could barely keep my eyes open. I'm like, man, I'm so excited for tomorrow. Yeah. That was super stressful, super difficult. Crazy. Let's do it again. Yep. So it works across the organization too. So when you're referring to your support staff and your technical staff, being able to have a business model, problem solving your way into a business model that supports all of that, that's where my mind goes. That to me is like, that hardline approach is you're nowhere near pulling the leash. It's like, how do we just figure this out, man? How do we get, what's the solution? How do we implement it? That's my ball game. I love it. And which was one of the primary attraction factors for me just as an individual. So go team.
Yep. Yeah, no, and it's just that toppling the hierarchy, and really just working with people's strengths, and
Yes.
that's exactly it. Is we identified, I think, a year and a half ago, I was done having veterinary people at the front desk. I was done with it.
Yeah.
Is the trend of, so the skill set, right? So we talk about deteriorating skill set. What happens in like every practice, is you have a veterinary student or a veterinary technology student who's working your front end, who's learning the front end process, and then we're going to train you in our organization by having you answer the phones first and dealing with people. But the whole time you are there, your mind is on the other side of the door.
Right.
Your mind
right.
is in back. You're trying to think about patient care. You want to just stand back there and watch. I want to look and see, and it's, now don't get me wrong, there are clinics where you have people that have been working the front end for 20 years. I mean, there are those ingrained people, but we're talking about the typical trend of how you're bringing people in the organization. And
earn your place
Earn your
model.
place, yes. Earn your place. The hierarchy is you start at the beginning and you work your way up. You start at the front and you work your way back. That's how we do it. And I was done with it. Because it's, you're turning your staff over, and it's not even that you're losing staff. It's just, you're training them for this one job, and then they move in back, and you got to train the next person. They move in back. You got to train the next person. They move in back, or whatever it happens to be. And I'm not saying all businesses are run that way, but I mean, I think it's kind of a trend, at least in some capacity. But to get people who are people, and get those people up front, and
Right.
I think to say that my front end has zero animal experience. I mean,
I love it.
yeah,
I
marketing
love
and
that.
strategic planning. Grant is design.
Sarah has masters in.
We should know that.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna remember. It was recreational management.
Yeah, recreational management.
I couldn't
Yep.
get the word public out
That's
of my
right.
head
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I was thinking of
Parks and
Rec.
Rec. Yeah, Parks and Rec.
Yeah.
Masters in recreational management.
Yep.
So it's like the individuals that we have in those positions, it's like they're not coming in with these strong veterinary experiences, but guess what? They're good with people.
They are.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And so again, I think it comes back to, looking at acknowledging that we have so many different things we can bring to the team, and each of us have our own individual talents for the team, and recognizing that, and this kind of gets us into our core values of sort of serving the patient. That's all we're there to do, sometimes in spite of ourselves, but it's that enthusiasm. It's infectious.
Yes.
When you're in this type of an environment where it's, I'm not saying that we don't have our spats. It's not like a perfect utopia. We sometimes have qualms between staff, but we learn how to get through it. We learn how to get over it. We do it in a very respectful way. And, it's like we had two of our employees where they just weren't seeing eye to eye, not seeing eye to eye. It's like, all right, girls, come on.
Right.
Let's get through this. And it was just a simple misunderstanding from a week before. And now they're way stronger now as an employee team than they were even before that conflict had occurred. So part of its core values, of course, is all conflict resolution as well.
Right.
But yeah, so, I think, we've gone just about, over an hour here, hour 15, hour 20, on sort of just discussing talent.
Yeah.
And I think at the end of the day, the general discussion is that, what has happened to us as a profession is we've really lost our self-worth and our individuality. Single-handedly is the next biggest problem between the failed bond spectrum alignment and culture, to then coming into this loss of self-worth in the talent category, to then coming into our lack of infrastructure within the service industry is going to be, of course, the third video that we have. And then from there, we're going to start to have lots of videos related to discussion, or to solutions, rather.
Solutions, Yeah, so the moral of the story is stay tuned.
Right.
Because don't get me wrong, do we all, I feel like starting in the middle, extremely necessary.
Absolutely.
We all have to sit on the same page to understand where these solutions are coming from. I feel like that was a pretty well put together description of these three elements.
There may be four, there may be five, but
Right.
For the most part, what we look at is these being kind of your major hot topics on why we hate ourselves.
Right.
Essentially.
What's wrong with me today? Where do I
it's-
pick this from today?
And we all suffer from it, especially, I think since, we started PAW Health and since we started working together, all of that has completely melted away. My thing is when I have someone we'll talk about this in core values, but when I have someone come in the door and they punch in as an employee, I don't want them to worry about money. I don't want them to worry about the health of themselves and their family. You know, I don't want these things to be worries in our organization. Check your ego at the door, check your problems at the door, and we're going to start to treat and manage patients because that's what our patients rely upon us to do. But if you don't have, again, if you don't have good income, if you have a lot of these skill set issues, if you have a lot of these other problems, and that's what you're coming in with, we have solutions to some of those. But ultimately, at the end of the day, to work on that category is an acceptance of the solutions that we've had. And it's not saying that it's a perfect solution in every scenario, but it comes back to we just have a lot of ways we can help people.
Right.
And
exactly.
The loss of talent, we know that it happens. We know that everyone's out there with this feeling, and we're here to help.
Yeah.
So I think that pretty much kind of wraps up our talent discussion.
Yeah,
the next up is going to be service. At least one of the major problems in service, again, is our overall lack of infrastructure, uniformed lack of infrastructure within the profession. It's going to be, I don't think it's going to be a particularly heavy business discussion because, it's again, more so of like general practices of, how operations are and the state of affairs. So we're just going to continue on our why, asking why.
Yep.
So thanks for kind of hanging in there, guys. We'll see you guys next time around.